Williams, step away from the gate and show me your hands!
Officer, I'm standing in my own garden. What crime am I suspected of?
Don't get smart with me. We received reports of suspicious activity.
Suspicious activity? I'm watering my roses at 7 a.m. on my own property.
Turn around and put your hands on the gate, now!
I will not comply with an unlawful order. State your reasonable suspicion.
It's 6:47 a.m. exactly on a Tuesday morning in Riverside Heights, one of the most exclusive neighborhoods in the city. The digital clock on Judge Patricia Williams' kitchen counter reflects in the window as she fills her copper watering can, steam rising from an untouched coffee mug that sits cooling on the granite countertop. Patricia steps outside, morning dew immediately dampening her worn Adidas sneakers. The scent of mulch and rose fertilizer clings to her fingertips from yesterday's garden work. She's dressed in faded jeans and an old Harvard Law sweatshirt that's seen better days, looking like any weekend gardener rather than one of the most respected federal judges in the district. She begins her precise morning routine, checking soil moisture with her index finger exactly 2 inches deep around each rose bush. Count out 12 drops of rose food per plant. Water in a clockwise pattern starting from the heritage roses her grandmother planted decades ago. This methodical approach isn't just about gardening, it's the same systematic precision she brings to every case that crosses her bench. A constitutional law journal lies open on her garden bench, left from last night's reading session. Her phone alarm briefly displays, motion calendar prep, 9 a.m. before she silences it. As she waters near the property line, she unconsciously notes the neighbor's fence encroachment, muttering about adverse possession, legal language that flows naturally from years on the federal bench. She photographs her prized David Austin roses for her garden journal, using the same systematic approach she applies when documenting evidence in complex federal cases. Each shot is precisely framed, methodically cataloged. These aren't just flowers to Patricia, they're living connections to her grandmother's legacy, tended with the same care she applies to constitutional law. Right now, someone somewhere is being judged for simply existing in a space where others think they don't belong. If this story is making you think differently about assumptions and bias, smash that like button and subscribe, because awareness is the first step toward change. But Patricia has no idea that in less than 30 minutes, those same careful documentation skills will become her lifeline when her own constitutional rights are about to be violated. Patricia Williams is 52 years old and has served as a federal district judge for 15 years. But you wouldn't know any of this looking at her right now. Her authority is completely hidden beneath gardening clothes and early morning casual routines. That Harvard sweatshirt could belong to any college graduate. Those legal journals could be anyone's reading material. Her precise language sounds like general education rather than judicial expertise. She moved to Riverside Heights just 6 months ago after her divorce was finalized. Her adult children live in other states, busy with their own careers. The neighbors have never seen her in her professional capacity. To them, she's just the quiet woman who keeps to herself and maintains an impressive garden. Her professional habits are disguised as personality quirks. Constitutional knowledge appears as civic awareness. Evidence gathering looks like hobbyist documentation. Precise legal speech seems like careful, educated conversation. Nothing about her morning routine screams federal judge. Riverside Heights sprawls before her, an affluent gated community where large lots are separated by perfectly manicured hedges. Morning joggers in expensive athletic wear pound the sidewalks. Her corner property is visible from the street, showcasing an elaborate heritage rose garden behind a wrought iron gate with a stone pathway leading to her front door. At 7:15 a.m., the atmosphere is quintessentially suburban peaceful. It's a school day, so most residents have already departed for work in their luxury vehicles. A mail truck makes its rounds while sprinkler systems activate across million-dollar lawns. Neighbors are visible in windows, focused on their own morning routines, coffee, newspapers, preparing for another day in their comfortable lives. Patricia tends to her prize-winning roses with the devotion of someone who understands that beautiful things require daily attention. This morning ritual grounds her before facing the demanding world of federal court proceedings. Joggers pass by with earbuds, lost in podcasts and music, completely unaware they're witnessing what will become a national news story. The peaceful routine is about to be shattered in ways that will expose the deepest fault lines in American society. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell. This story gets more unbelievable by the minute. At 7:23 a.m., an anonymous 911 call comes through to dispatch. there's a suspicious person lurking around the expensive property on Maple and Riverside. She's been there for 20 minutes looking around like she doesn't belong. We've had break-ins in the area recently. The caller hangs up without providing their name. Recent burglaries in neighboring Westfield estates have residents on edge, seeing threats in every unfamiliar face. The dispatcher logs it as a possible prowler call and sends the closest patrol unit. Officer Derek Manning, an 8-year veteran of the force, receives the call while finishing his morning coffee 3 blocks away. Manning is under pressure lately. There have been complaints about slow response times in wealthy neighborhoods, and he's been hoping for a promotion to detective. This call seems like an easy win. Respond quickly, handle professionally, file a clean report. Manning arrives to see exactly what he expected. A black woman in casual clothes at an elaborate property worth well over $1 million. His assumption is immediate and certain. She doesn't belong here. The gardening tools in her hands and the hose connected to the spigot don't register as evidence of residence. Instead, his mind processes it as suspicious behavior. Most people around the neighborhood ignore what's happening. Joggers keep running, earbuds blocking out the world. Neighbors close blinds rather than watch. The mail carrier accelerates his route, not wanting to get involved in police business. This is how it always starts, with willful blindness and the assumption that authority figures know what they're doing. "Ma'am, can you tell me what you're doing here?" Manning's tone seems polite, but the language is coded. He's not asking a neighbor about her morning routine, he's questioning a suspect's presence. Judge Patricia Williams turns from her roses, her judicial training immediately kicking in. She remains calm, shows no defensiveness, and answers directly, "I'm watering my roses. I live here." "Can you prove that?" Manning asks, his hand instinctively moving toward his radio. Patricia sets down her watering can and reaches into her gardening bag. "Of course. Here's my house key." Manning examines the key briefly. "This could be stolen or copied. Anyone could have made this key." She points to the mailbox clearly visible from where they're standing. "My name is right there, Patricia Williams." "That doesn't prove current residence," Manning responds, his certainty unshaken. "You could be using someone else's name." Patricia looks down at her Harvard Law sweatshirt, hoping the educational credibility might help. "I'm clearly not some random person. Anyone can buy college merchandise," Manning dismisses. "I need real identification." She produces her driver's license, pointing to the address that exactly matches the property where they're standing. Manning studies it for a long moment before handing it back. "You could be house-sitting or caretaking. Rich people hire help to maintain properties." Patricia's judicial patience begins to thin. Each piece of evidence she provides gets dismissed with increasingly creative explanations. Manning radios dispatch, possible break-in suspect at Riverside and Maple. Subject claims to live here but behavior remains suspicious. The goalpost keeps moving. Every reasonable explanation gets rejected. Manning has committed to his initial assumption and now he's working backward to justify it rather than following evidence forward to truth. "Officer," Patricia says, her constitutional expertise surfacing, "you're making assumptions based on my race and my presence in this neighborhood. What specific crime do you suspect me of committing?" "Don't try to lawyer me," Manning snaps. "I'm giving you lawful orders." But Patricia knows the law better than he does. "You cannot detain me without reasonable suspicion of criminal activity. Standing in my own garden while black is not a crime." Manning's frustration escalates. Her knowledge of constitutional rights sounds like resistance rather than expertise. He calls for backup. "Need additional unit at Riverside and Maple. Uncooperative subject, possible burglary in progress." Patricia feels her carefully maintained judicial composure beginning to crack. Years of similar experiences flood back. The assumption that she doesn't belong in professional spaces, the surprise when she reveals her credentials, the grudging respect that follows. But today is different. Today she's not in her federal judge robes. Today she's just another black woman in the wrong place at the wrong time. The trigger comes when Manning says, "People like you don't usually live in neighborhoods like this." The words hit Patricia like a physical blow, transporting her instantly to 1978. She's 8 years old again, watching through her bedroom window as 2 police officers question her father outside their middle-class home. He's still in his postal worker uniform, coming home from his night shift, and the neighbors had called about a suspicious person walking through the neighborhood. She remembers the same helpless feeling watching her father produce his house key, his identification, his work badge. Nothing was ever enough. The officers eventually left when her mother came outside in her nursing scrubs, but the damage was done. Young Patricia learned that belonging somewhere doesn't protect you from other people's assumptions about where you belong. The memory fades, bringing her back to the present moment. 44 years later, she's a federal judge with 15 years on the bench, and she's having the exact same conversation her father had. Achievement, education, credentials, none of it matters when you're reduced to a threat in someone else's imagination. But this time is different. This time she knows her rights, and she's sworn an oath to defend the Constitution even when it's inconvenient. A few neighbors emerge from houses but stay at a distance, phones raised to record but kept hidden. They want to capture what's happening without taking sides. Their behavior is calculated, close enough to witness, far enough to avoid involvement. Manning's radio crackles. Unit 47, what's your status? Subject refuses to comply with lawful orders. Maintaining scene until backup arrives. Patricia realizes this has moved beyond property ownership. This is about power, assumptions, and the dangerous intersection of unconscious bias with legal authority. She's watching Fourth Amendment violations occur in real time, and as a federal judge she has a duty to address it. Officer Hayes arrives as backup, surveying the scene. Expensive neighborhood, well-maintained property, calm but assertive woman in gardening clothes. 2 officers, 1 civilian, and an escalating situation despite clear evidence of legitimate residence. What do we have here? Hayes asked. Manning briefs him. Possible burglary suspect claims to live here. Non-cooperative with identification. Patricia understands she's now facing 2 officers who have been primed to see her as a threat rather than a resident. The situation has escalated beyond reason, and she's running out of options to de-escalate peacefully. This story is about to take a turn that will shock the entire justice system. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss what happens next. Officer Hayes takes charge of the scene, his arrival bringing new energy to an already tense situation. Manning immediately briefs him with language that frames Patricia as the problem. Possible burglary suspect claims to live here, non-cooperative with identification, refuses lawful orders. Hayes surveys the expensive neighborhood and well-maintained property, noting Patricia's calm demeanor despite the escalating situation. Something doesn't feel right, but he's been trained to support fellow officers, especially when they've already committed to a course of action. Ma'am, my partner says you've been unable to provide adequate proof of residence, Hayes says, attempting to reset the conversation with a more professional tone. Patricia's gardening bag is scattered from repeated searches for documentation. Her phone battery is dying from the morning photo session of her roses. The simple task of proving she belongs in her own home has become bureaucratically complex. I've provided my house key, driver's license with matching address, and pointed out my name on the mailbox, Patricia explains with the patience she normally reserves for explaining complex legal precedents. What additional proof would satisfy you? Neighbors who initially emerged to watch from a distance now claim they didn't see how it started, when Hayes asks for witness statements. The human tendency to avoid involvement kicks in. Nobody wants to contradict police officers or get pulled into an incident that might require court testimony. Hayes wants a quick resolution that lets everyone move on with their morning. Let's all calm down and figure this out, he suggests, but his tone implies the burden of proof still lies with Patricia rather than with the officers who initiated the confrontation. Hayes runs a full background check, calling the property records office that won't open until 8:30 a.m. The computer system runs slowly, processing queries with bureaucratic inefficiency. Multiple phone calls are needed: property tax records, mortgage information, utility connections. The simple question of, who lives here, becomes a complex administrative procedure. Patricia offers the ultimate verification: call the federal courthouse and ask for Chief Justice Morrison. He'll confirm my identity and position. Manning immediately dismisses this suggestion. We're not waking up federal judges at 7:30 a.m. for a property dispute. Anyone can name-drop important people. The irony is lost on Manning. He's refusing to verify Patricia's claim that she's a federal judge while simultaneously explaining why he won't call federal judges. Hayes continues his systematic verification process, showing the thoroughness that police work requires when officers choose to be thorough. Property tax records confirm Patricia Williams as the homeowner. Utility connections show active service in her name. The mortgage is current and properly documented. Database results start coming back. Federal District Judge Patricia Williams, appointed 2009, confirmed address match at Riverside Heights property. Hayes' expression changes as he realizes the magnitude of what's happening. This isn't a case of mistaken identity or inadequate documentation. This is a federal judge being detained in her own garden based on assumptions about who belongs in expensive neighborhoods. Manning doubles down despite the evidence. Still suspicious behavior. Early morning activity in an expensive neighborhood isn't normal. Patricia's judicial composure finally cracks. Years of similar experiences surface. The boarding school classmate who asked if she was there on scholarship, the law clerk position where partners assumed she was a secretary, the judicial confirmation hearings where senators questioned whether she was really qualified. "Officer Manning," she says with the authority that commands federal courtrooms, "haven't we met before?" Manning looks closer, studying her face without the context of judicial robes and elevated bench. Recognition starts slowly, like puzzle pieces falling into place. 2 years ago, Manning testified in Judge Williams' courtroom in a federal perjury case. His thorough investigative work had uncovered evidence that led to conviction. Judge Williams had commended his attention to detail and professional presentation. She had specifically noted his integrity and dedication to truth. The memory crashes over Manning like a cold wave. This is the judge who praised his police work. This is the federal judge who thanked him for his service to justice. This is the woman whose courtroom he'd entered with respect and left with professional pride. And he just spent 30 minutes trying to prove she was a criminal. Hayes immediately steps back and offers apologies, recognizing that this situation has moved far beyond a simple neighborhood dispute. This is now a potential civil rights violation involving a federal judge. Most neighbors have gone inside rather than continue watching. The few who remain avoid eye contact, understanding that they've witnessed something that will have consequences extending far beyond this morning's incident. Patricia's judicial assistant arrives for their scheduled morning briefing pickup, creating an additional witness to the scene. The assistant's shock at seeing her boss detained by police officers will become part of the official record. Scanner traffic about a federal judge incident gets picked up by local news outlets. Reporters start making phone calls before the situation is even resolved. The next part of this story will show you how quickly everything can unravel when unconscious bias meets constitutional authority. Hit subscribe to see the shocking consequences. The moment Manning recognizes Judge Patricia Williams, the entire dynamic shifts like a fault line breaking. This isn't just any federal judge. This is the judge who commended his thorough police work, who praised his integrity, who treated him with respect and appreciation when he testified in her courtroom. Manning's supervisor, Sergeant Thompson, arrives at the scene after Hayes radioed for immediate command presence. Thompson surveys the situation. 2 patrol officers, a federal judge, scattered gardening tools, and the growing realization that his department is facing a public relations nightmare of epic proportions. What exactly is going on here? Thompson demands, his tone suggesting he already knows this isn't going to end well for anyone involved. Patricia's federal judicial ID card is finally given the serious examination it should have received from the beginning. Hayes shows it to Thompson, whose face goes pale as he processes the implications. "Ma'am, I am deeply sorry for this misunderstanding," Thompson begins, using the careful language of someone who knows lawyers are listening to every word. "We're going to resolve this situation immediately." But Patricia Williams didn't become a federal judge by accepting easy apologies for constitutional violations. Her judicial training kicks in, and she begins mentally cataloging every procedural error, every rights violation, every moment when proper protocol was abandoned in favor of assumptions. "Sergeant, this wasn't a misunderstanding," Patricia says with the precision that makes attorneys nervous in her courtroom. "I was detained without reasonable suspicion, questioned without probable cause, and had my constitutional rights violated based solely on racial profiling. That's not a misunderstanding, that's a civil rights violation." Manning realizes his career isn't just in jeopardy, it's over. The promotion he'd been working toward disappears. The pension he'd been counting on vanishes. The respect he'd built over 8 years of police work crumbles in the space between recognition and regret. Hayes writes a detailed incident report, documenting every violation he witnessed and every procedure that wasn't followed. Unlike Manning, Hayes chooses cooperation over cover-up, understanding that honesty might salvage his career while lies will definitely destroy it. Patricia's neighbor approaches cautiously, holding a tablet displaying security camera footage. "I have everything recorded from my Ring doorbell," she says quietly. The whole interaction is documented. The footage shows Manning's immediate assumptions, the repeated evidence rejection, the escalation despite Patricia's calm responses. Most importantly, it captures the moment Manning dismissed her offer to call federal judges because, "We don't wake up judges for property disputes." Media attention intensifies as word spreads through police scanner networks. Local news stations receive tips about a federal judge detained in her own garden. Social media posts begin appearing from neighbors who recorded portions of the incident on their phones. Patricia realizes she faces an impossible choice. As a federal judge, she must recuse herself from any case involving Manning or his department, removing her from potential legal remedies. As a private citizen, she's been subjected to treatment that demands accountability. Manning's pattern of behavior comes under scrutiny as Internal Affairs begins immediate investigation. Previous complaints that were dismissed or buried resurface. Citizens who felt mistreated but lacked credibility to challenge police authority suddenly have their experiences validated by a federal judge's identical treatment. The connection between Manning and Patricia becomes public knowledge when court records show his testimony in her courtroom just 2 years earlier. News outlets focus on the irony. An officer who was praised by a judge for his integrity later detained that same judge based on racial assumptions. Manning's family faces immediate consequences. His wife receives calls from reporters. His children's classmates see their father's name in news headlines. The personal cost of professional misconduct extends beyond individual careers into family stability and community standing. Patricia continues her morning routine, returning to her roses as if detention and interrogation were just another interruption to be handled with judicial efficiency. But she waters her plants with the knowledge that her private sanctuary has been violated, her presumption of belonging in her own neighborhood shattered. Federal judicial ethics require Patricia to report the incident to appropriate authorities. Her position demands that constitutional violations be addressed through proper legal channels rather than ignored for personal convenience. The neighborhood association faces awkward questions about recent security concerns and whether racial bias influenced perceptions of who belongs in Riverside Heights. Anonymous 911 calls about suspicious persons are reviewed for patterns that might indicate systematic profiling. Public defenders' offices begin reviewing cases where Manning's testimony influenced convictions. If an officer demonstrates racial bias in his personal conduct, it raises questions about bias in his professional testimony and evidence gathering. This story is about to reveal consequences that changed an entire police department forever. Subscribe now to see how the justice system handles one of its own. 3 months after that morning in Patricia's garden, Internal Affairs completes the most thorough investigation in the department's history. What they discover goes far beyond a single incident of racial profiling. Manning's service record reveals a pattern of complaints that were consistently dismissed or minimized. Citizens who filed grievances about excessive stops, aggressive questioning, and racial bias were told their complaints were unsubstantiated. But with a federal judge's identical experience providing credibility, previous victims find their voices. The investigation uncovers 17 separate incidents over Manning's 8-year career where citizens reported being stopped, questioned, or detained without adequate justification. In 14 of those cases, the citizens were Black or Latino. All 14 incidents occurred in affluent neighborhoods where the victims were deemed out of place. Federal civil rights investigators from the Department of Justice joined the investigation under 18 U.S.C. Section 242. Which criminalizes willful violations of constitutional rights under color of law. This statute carries serious penalties including federal prison time. Manning is terminated from the police force immediately upon completion of the internal investigation. His police pension is forfeited. His law enforcement certification is permanently revoked, preventing future employment in any police capacity. The federal criminal case moves forward with overwhelming evidence. Security camera footage, witness testimony, and Manning's own radio communications create an indisputable record of constitutional violations. Most damaging is Manning's dismissal of Patricia's offer to call federal judges, demonstrating willful disregard for evidence that contradicted his assumptions. Judge Patricia Williams faces her own ethical obligations. She recuses herself from all cases involving Manning's department, creating scheduling complications for the federal court system. She cooperates fully with investigators while maintaining appropriate judicial distance from prosecutorial decisions. Manning's attorney attempts to negotiate a plea deal, arguing that unconscious bias doesn't constitute willful violation of civil rights. Federal prosecutors reject this defense, presenting evidence that Manning consciously chose to ignore clear evidence of Patricia's legitimate residence in favor of maintaining his initial racial assumptions. The trial becomes a national news story, highlighting systemic issues in policing and the intersection of racial bias with legal authority. Patricia's status as a federal judge makes the case impossible to dismiss as isolated misconduct or misunderstanding. Testimony reveals that Manning recognized Patricia's legal knowledge but interpreted it as resistance rather than expertise. His radio communications show escalating frustration with her attitude, rather than recognition of constitutional violations. The prosecution presents expert testimony about implicit bias and how unconscious prejudices become willful discrimination when officers ignore evidence that contradicts their assumptions. Manning's pattern of similar incidents demonstrates willfulness rather than momentary poor judgment. Manning's conviction on federal civil rights charges results in a 12-year prison sentence. The judge cited his abuse of police authority, pattern of discriminatory enforcement, and complete lack of remorse during trial proceedings. The sentence sends shockwaves through law enforcement communities nationwide. Officers who previously dismissed bias complaints as inevitable friction realize that federal prosecution is possible when constitutional violations are clearly documented. Manning's conviction triggers mandatory review of all cases where his testimony contributed to criminal convictions. Several convictions are overturned when defendants successfully argue that Manning's demonstrated racial bias infected his professional testimony. Judge Patricia Williams uses her experience to develop comprehensive bias training for federal law enforcement agencies. Her curriculum combines constitutional law education with practical scenarios designed to help officers recognize and overcome unconscious prejudices. The Riverside Heights Neighborhood Association implements bias awareness programming after residents admit that racial assumptions influenced their security concerns. The anonymous 911 caller who reported Patricia as suspicious publicly apologizes and participates in community education efforts. Patricia's morning garden routine resumes, but she now tends her roses with a security system and knowledge that her private sanctuary was violated by the very system she serves. Her heritage roses continue blooming, but their caretaker's innocence about belonging in her own neighborhood has been permanently damaged. Manning serves his sentence in federal prison, where he has 12 years to contemplate how unconscious bias destroyed his career, his family's stability, and his freedom. His case becomes a textbook example in police academies of how assumptions can escalate into federal crimes. The incident changes police training protocols nationwide. Officers learn Patricia's story as an example of how racial profiling can destroy careers and violate citizens' most fundamental rights. The case study emphasizes that constitutional protections apply equally regardless of race, neighborhood, or time of day. Hayes, the backup officer who cooperated with investigators, receives commendation for professional conduct and ethical reporting. His career continues successfully because he chose truth over solidarity when faced with obvious misconduct. Patricia continues serving on the federal bench, but her perspective on police-citizen interactions has been forever changed by experiencing law enforcement from the civilian side. Her rulings reflect deeper understanding of how constitutional violations feel to those who experience them. Manning's family rebuilds their lives slowly, dealing with the shame and financial hardship of his crimes. His children learn painful lessons about how prejudice destroys everything it touches, including families of those who harbor it. The case establishes legal precedent that federal judges, like all citizens, have the right to be secure in their own homes without racial profiling. More importantly, it demonstrates that constitutional violations carry real consequences regardless of the victim's status or the officer's intentions. Patricia's roses bloom each spring, tended with the same methodical care but now representing resilience rather than routine. The garden that was once her peaceful sanctuary has become a symbol of perseverance through injustice and the ongoing struggle for equal treatment under law. The story ends where it began, with Patricia in her garden, watering heritage roses in the early morning light. But now she tends them with the knowledge that belonging somewhere legally doesn't protect you from other people's assumptions about where you belong socially. Her garden gate bears witness to the truth that justice sometimes comes at the cost of innocence, and that even federal judges aren't immune to the prejudices that poison American society. Manning's 12-year sentence serves as a reminder that constitutional violations under color of law carry serious consequences, and that unconscious bias becomes criminal conduct when officers choose assumptions over evidence, prejudice over procedure, and power over justice. This incredible true story shows us that justice can prevail when we refuse to accept prejudice as normal. Subscribe for more stories of accountability and courage.